to Bottom Line with Bob and Kendall Ehrlich. This is another potpourri show that we have to inform you. It's not very uplifting, but we are informing you of things that you need to know and discuss with your neighbors. Right. Neighbors, friends. You need to be armed with the information so you can persuade.
So potpourri, we like potpourri, but it's fast moving, right?
It is fast moving. We've
Potpourri
got a lot
shows
to cover.
There's a lot of items in the news. We try to aim for 25 to 30 minutes a show, so we got to go. So let's go. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Well, first 9/11, just looking back for a minute, many moving tributes. I thought President Trump did a great move stopping by local fire departments in New York and police precincts. I'm not going to get into President Bush's speech too much here. It looks like that America has not forgotten. America should never forget. A lot of the tributes are very moving and appropriate, and you just hope that it's not just remembering, but lessons learned, and maybe those lessons have not been learned, but we'll get into that in the body of our show.
We'll definitely get into that. We were traveling on 9/11, which, quite frankly, I was nervous about flying on. And on that particular day, we didn't have enhanced
Saturday,
security.
we were fine.
But on Sunday, we had enhanced security coming back in that as you got onto the flight, they checked your ID and your boarding pass once again. Right there at the gate, which they normally don't do. I've never seen it done.
We've never seen it done.
Since 9/11, but it certainly made you feel secure and certainly want to cooperate in any way you can.
It did make us feel secure.
It did. It made you feel good about flying in those times. And it's also an illustration, I know you want to get into this, but it's probably the most uncertain time right now since 9/11 that people are feeling because of what's gone on in Afghanistan and not having lots of facts, not knowing who's in the country, having an open border. I think that that is weighing on people.
That opens up our next little item here concerning Afghanistan and the terror threat. This phrase, over the horizon intel, you keep reading about in the reports. Over the horizon, which means distanced, over the horizon intel. Now, we're familiar with intel. We're familiar with human intel. We're familiar with
cyber intel.
We're familiar with, obviously, getting communications and the whole 9 yards. But over the horizon intel, I think, is a nice way to say we don't have in-country intel anymore because it's over the horizon. And over the horizon should not make the American people feel real good. We no longer have a presence in Afghanistan. One commentator, I did not write the commentator's name down, but his phrase was, an extremist petri dish has been created in Afghanistan. And there's a real fear of the reconstitution of Al-Qaeda. You just raised the point, babe, also with respect to the reconstitution of Al-Qaeda and a safe country for, again, terrorism to regenerate.
And we have no presence.
And conversely, the flip side, the domestic side of that is this porous southern border, which becomes more porous by the hour, by the day, by the week. How good is our vetting? Do we really know how good our vetting has been over the past few months since the welcome anyone in the world sign was placed at the southern border on January 20th, since stay in Mexico was taken down? Because why? It was working, but it was taken down because President Donald Trump had that policy, and it was successful to that point, as we've discussed numerous times. So we have a real refugee crisis in our country. Talk about a circumstance ripe for potential terrorist activity. We just don't know with regard to some of these people. You hear these numbers. We caught a couple thousand of these folks, criminals, whole 9 yards. We'll define criminal. We just don't know. And these pictures from this week and the drones, and the Fox drone was taken down and the helicopter had to go back up. The local folks put the Fox reporters back in the air because the crowd scenes were so disturbing, so enormous. The Border Patrol, the country's southern border is so open. It's almost indescribable.
I mean, it can keep you up at night thinking about what's coming over the border. We've talked before, the drugs, the sex trafficking.
Getting back to Afghanistan, a kinder, enlightened Taliban has been the the Defense Department, the State Department's line, it appears. This guy, Arkhani, he is a close ally of Al-Qaeda's. He's now the new Minister of the Interior in Afghanistan. That is their FBI. He's a designated terrorist for good measure. And we hear about this kinder, enlightened Taliban, but you are the person I know that knows most about sex trafficking in the world. You are really concerned about women in Afghanistan, despite the fact women in this country are not talking about women in Afghanistan, particularly the feminists. So you want to be heard on this.
Well, there's a great article in the Washington Times on September the 17th by Ann Basham, who is my friend. She knows much more about sex trafficking than me. And Claire Morrell, they wrote an article that's really terrific, and I'm going to quote from it in a minute. Anne is the CEO of ATI, Anti-Trafficking International, and Claire Morrell is Ethics and Public Policy Center. She's there as an analyst. So let me just tell you what the kinder, gentler terrorist state will be doing, and we've already seen terrible video, and we know they're murdering people. And on top of that, ISIS has fueled, and I'm quoting, their operations in the Middle East by raiding villages in Iraq, stealing an entire generation of women and girls, putting them in underground rooms where many of them never see the light of day for years, and then selling them sometimes over and over again, sometimes many times a day, to men. And this is all for between $200 and $1,500 a day, bringing in a significant source of income, much better than the poppy fields, by the way, because that just goes to one user and is used one time. But these women are sold over and over again.
These are girls in many cases.
Oh,
right?
Often the average age around 13, very young, allegedly marrying some of these men. And it is just something that in this country is just horrific to even think about. And it really brings in mind, where are the women? Where are the feminists? Where is the outrage? It's just unbelievable. We need secret or special ops to go over there and get these women out. Wow. Because the treatment of women by the Taliban, by ISIS, by all of the terrorist organizations, I mean, we know what's going to happen. And
you had talked about Iraq here, and ISIS in Iraq.
Right.
We're also talking about the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Same deal.
Same MO,
right?
Same MO.
Young girls sold again and again and again into the sex trade, forcible marriages.
Just horrifying.
Yeah. It's an horrific story. Horrific storyline, and nobody's talking about it.
Well, I appreciate these organizations that I'm talking about, particularly
Yes,
Anti-Trafficking International. They're getting the word out. They're trying to raise money, help these places, and hopefully get some of these women here in safety, which is what we need to do.
Well, Secretary Blinken has some comforting words for you. Quote, the Taliban has committed to preventing terrorist groups from using Afghanistan as a base for external operations against the United States. What do you think about that?
It's unbelievable that he can say that with a straight face.
The naivete proceeds apace. Another point with regard to Afghanistan. America is back. Remember the great line from the press, the media, our Western allies, the NATO members that got so embarrassed by President Trump. Pay up, deadbeats, the whole 9 yards. They didn't like it. Our NATO, particularly the deadbeats, didn't like being called deadbeats. Remember that? Back in the club. America's back. You heard it from Joe Biden. Well, not so much these days. We know the Czech president last week referred to the cowardice of the United States. We know the Brits are on record. Members of Parliament are on record. Prime Minister's on record. The Germans are on record. The French are on record. Our NATO allies are not so happy about America being back in the club because this is a weakened America back in the club these days.
And they expect us to lead, always have.
In that respect, babe, not so fast, because it looks like a number of our European allies are looking at a pan-European defense force. This now will be a NATO knockoff without the United States because
they can't rely on us.
That's correct. And so if America is no longer a trustworthy partner with regard to these multilateral alliances, these countries are going to do it alone.
I mean, this is really the first time that we are so weakened with Europe. I mean, it's one thing to be perceived and weakened with China, Soviet Union, but to be the weak link with the Europeans, I mean, and our allies,
Think
that's
about
disturbing.
that weak link. That weak link leads to miscreants doing bad things. Another item, North Korea launches new long-range missile last week, or 9/11, by the way, 930 miles. North Korea continues to do its saber-rattling thing.
China doing the same thing to Taiwan, by the way.
Absolutely. The next thing, the timing of troop withdrawal. We've talked about this issue. It hasn't been well reported, at least the bottom line concerning what orders were given at what point. At least there was some clarity last week. General Austin Miller, in testimony before the House Armed Services Committee, corroborated what right, left, Republican, Democrat have generally agreed is the case, that the military advice to the president was, do not withdraw these troops at this point. Do not give the enemy that particular date. And we talk about Bagram Air Force Base and the closure, literally the overnight fleeing.
All of our equipment left behind.
Of our equipment left behind. Well, that was a fait accompli, because once the order was given of the drawdown, we didn't have enough troops to protect the Air Force Base. So that testimony appears to be the case. By the way, the Biden administration is not backing away from this. They're counting this as a foreign policy victory. So again, I suspect we're going to have this debate in the midterms. We're going to have this debate in 2024. Whether it's President Biden running again, whoever the Republicans are going to nominate next time, this will be an issue in the midterms and in the next presidential race, no doubt about it. So that's the deal with regard to Afghanistan. Before we leave the military potpourri, though, General Milley's alleged follies dominated the news last week.
I mean, if true, this is incredibly serious, and there has to be some consequence finally in Washington.
If he called his Chinese counterpart and assured him that he was in control and the president was not, that is an incredibly serious matter. Now, he says, I did nothing wrong. He says, I did nothing outside the normal course of events with regard to someone, his counterpart over in China, or his counterpart anywhere. This would be in the normal course of his job description. But people forget, this is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has one job, is to advise the president. We have civilian control of our military. That's what the whole country's all about, remember?
Just the phone call, the act of the phone call.
Well, he said he did nothing wrong with regard to the phone call. Our military leaders cannot pick and choose. He clearly did not like President Trump. Nevertheless, our military leaders cannot pick and choose. This can't be a one-day story. It demands oversight. Republicans have been screaming from the rooftops.
Yeah, if that's the case, then release the transcript of the phone call.
We could go on for Afghanistan. We've already devoted 3 shows. We're going to devote more, but numerous potpourri events concerning Afghanistan. Going back to the domestic front a bit, the spending plans of the president and the majority party in Congress have received a lot of attention, particularly in the context of a $1 trillion quote-unquote infrastructure, which actually had real infrastructure, roads and bridges, repair and all that sort of stuff in it, and now a $3.5 trillion quote-unquote human infrastructure bill, which has nothing to do with infrastructure. But what we've seen over the past week with respect to COVID and the variants, inflation, the rekindling of inflation, we've seen with labor shortages, we'll get into labor shortages in a second, and bad jobs report from last week, has the quote-unquote moderate Democrats left in Congress talking about slowing this train down, this $3.5 trillion train down. The left, the strong left, the progressive left, the dominant left, particularly in the House, has said, you don't get your $1 trillion real infrastructure if we don't get our $3.5 human infrastructure bill. Joe Manchin again strikes the most powerful person.
Thank goodness for him.
Well,
a breath of fresh air and some common sense.
He has called for a, quote, strategic pause. Now, that doesn't let you sleep great at night, but it does let you sleep. It's not necessarily the answer we're looking for. I would prefer a no. But the bottom line here is there are real problems in the country. We have been traveling. We'll be traveling throughout the fall because of football and our kids. We have seen anybody who's been in the airport, any hotel, in hospitality industry, talk to anyone in that business, you will hear stories of manpower shortages. We've seen it.
We've seen it. All you have to do is go to your grocery store and see the bare shelves. This country's not used to that. And that's in your neighborhood. That's going on there. But yeah, the hospitality industry is really hurting for employees.
And when you talk to the folks who are working, the bartenders, the waitresses, the folks, the desk clerks, you talk to anyone in that business, they'll tell you.
Yeah, and they're overworked.
Yes.
Like many of the airlines, they've had issues with people having such crazy schedules to try to make up for the COVID year.
So again, we don't know what's going to happen with concerning the 3.5. We do suspect that the bad economic news of recent vintage has slowed momentum down with respect to this bill. Again, Joe Manchin emerges as the key player, getting a lot of pressure from Republicans, getting a lot of pressure from the left, playing that middle deal again. And so we shall see. But it's not even halftime in that football game yet. We'll see how it plays out. The interesting thing, we'll go back to these quote-unquote moderate Democrats in the House in our last potpourri item here, which concerns the midterm elections. Next item, potpourri, the vaccine mandate. The president got hit pretty strong last week with his mandate. He promised not that long ago that he would never do this. He promised never to make the vaccine mandatory. Last week, in a very, very strongly worded announcement that impacts 100 million people, impacts all federal workers. Actually, it doesn't impact everyone. It doesn't impact postal workers. It doesn't impact members of Congress, and it doesn't impact migrants at the southern border. Other than that, it looks like we've got everybody clear.
They must have great lobbyists.
Oh, listen, the migrants are the best lobbyists in the world. Are you kidding me? The majority party in Congress. Now, we, for those of you who are just coming to our show, who do not know us, know our history, we ran a commercial in Maryland over the past 6 to 8 months. The state of Maryland came to us, former governor, former first lady, to run a commercial pro-vax. Asked people, Marylanders, to get the vax, adult Marylanders to get the vax. We did the commercial. We are pro-vax. You've been vaccinated for a lot of different things, and so have I. So we are pro-vax, and we're pro-vax in this context, particularly concerning older people, those obviously who are in ill health, and the whole 9 yards.
But we also recognize that people should talk to their own doctor and make their own decision.
Right. It's called
freedom.
Overreach here. For real. It's called overreach here. Whatever happened to our bodies ourselves, dear?
Right,
Was
exactly.
that the great feminist
the feminists again.
slogan
Here we
there?
are.
So we see this as sort of similar, akin to the moratorium on evictions, that although this was thrown out there, the courts are not going, it's not going to pass constitutional muster. It's likely to be overturned.
Well, there's lots of challenges, various different
GOP
states.
GOP
Right.
governors have, real red state governors have come up with the idea of a program of challenging this in court. We also have on the other side here, Dr. Fauci raises his, well, I shouldn't say raises his voice. He raises it every day. But again, his quote is many, many more vaccine mandates to come.
When he opens his mouth, I don't listen. I mean, really, I think if I were a Democrat, I would want them to take him off, because no one in their right mind should be listening. Because whatever he says today, they have a clip of him saying the opposite months ago, or vice versa, by the way.
It still has not hurt him on the left, babe. It is not.
But
It
I
is
gotta
not.
tell you, and we had this discussion privately that, okay, they had the perfect storm. They had COVID. They had the election. They had fear. COVID and fear, and they were smart enough to get mail-in ballots quickly, change various laws before we knew what was happening.
They didn't change the laws; they went around the laws. But
okay, well, they changed a few in Pennsylvania. But at any rate, I think this time around we're aware of that, and people are aware of that, and you don't have to look any further than college football, because let me tell you something: the genie is not going back in that bottle. There is no way that the people that are going to college football games are going to get a booster. They may have gotten vaccinated and feel like, okay, I did my part. I feel like that. Okay, we did our part. but a booster for this and this variant and that variant, and it's going to be on and on and on.
When do I
and
get to live my life?
And Dr. Fauci is going to be the person giving that message. And many of us feel like, I don't even listen. I wouldn't listen to him if he told me the sky was blue.
Well, the great hypocrisy, and I put this out in a tweet last week, I believe, it was the Major League Baseball playoffs are hot right now. A lot of teams in contention, packed stadiums. We watch baseball, packed stadiums. Not a word out of CNN or the left. Not a word. College football, packed stadiums, it was the end of the world, right?
Well,
so
that coincides with their agenda against football.
Well, that probably does. In any event, but don't you think that you're right with regard to how the left views Dr. Fauci? They still see him as all-seeing. They still see him as Karnak, for any Johnny Carson fan out there.
The problem for the Democrats or the far left on that is those in between have now looked at him and listened to him for a year, and they're not buying it. Okay, they're not buying it either. Those of us on the right that question things anyway and actually have some valid questions that never get answered. But I'm talking about the group in the middle. And I think this time the genie's out of the bottle, and there's going to be a lot of variants. COVID is here to stay. Many people rolled up their sleeves. Governor DeSantis comes to mind, and manage the situation. Yep. And that's what people, I think, are looking for, because they don't want to lock down their lives like we did, because it just doesn't seem like there was a real purpose to that. What was the purpose? And all these questions that have never been answered.
Yeah, I'm not going to get real philosophical here, but we talk about, the framers talked about it, the great tension between security and freedom. Whether it's speech, whether it's your ability to travel, whatever it is, this is another front. This is basically where that line is. This has been the great debate of America from day one, from the jump. Really, where's that? Where do you draw that line with respect to personal security, state security, and individual freedom? The left obviously draws it more toward the left, toward state security. We draw it more to the right, toward individual freedom, individual knowledge, dictating individual choices.
But what this country is used to is the freedom to move around, to plan their weekends, to go to a football.
What it was used to.
No, I'm optimistic.
Well,
there's got to be an optimistic.
That's not how folks voted.
I'm optimistic,
okay.
Especially with midterms.
I'm writing you down as optimistic.
That's one.
Next potpourri item: China. Wow. China cyber attacks targeted to Asian Americans. I found this story really interesting. Targeted to Asian Americans, trying to get Asian Americans. You know how China plays race relations in the United States. They target their social media, their cyber attacks to their digital influence warfare front. And it just goes to show you 24/7 China's doing their thing against the United States. And we're not vigilant, particularly in this administration, in our view. So very interesting. Also, on September 6th, China sent 19 combat aircraft, 4 nuclear-capable bombers into Taiwan's air defense system zone. This is a regular occurrence. Saber rattling will only get worse, more intense with regard to China's perception of what the West, what NATO, what America will do should that saber rattling lead to real warfare. With regard to Taiwan.
And here's the trouble with that. There'll be a group of generals advising our president, and he might not listen to them.
Good point. Weakness always invites trouble. You think the Chinese are concerned by those words from Tony Blinken? Do you think the Chinese are concerned with respect to what we did in Afghanistan or the messages we've been putting out to the world? Yeah, we're back, but it's not America first. It's America somewhere in the middle of the pack. So again,
none of this saber rattling would have happened under President Trump.
No, it did. There were incursions, but again, you got to believe the bad guys had second thoughts because they thought they thought Bush was crazy, they thought Trump was crazy, they thought Reagan was crazy, they think Republican presidents are crazy.
Right.
There's fear, and you want your enemies, particularly those with nuclear weapons, to have a sense of fear. The border. We talked about this in the context of terrorism here. Just a news item. New strain of the virus, the MV strain, is looking to be highly transmissible.
Says Dr. Fauci.
The WHO, the WHO has traced the origin to Colombia and Ecuador. Now, look at the folks gathering on our southern border. Large numbers of Colombians and Ecuadorians
With no tests.
have joined the tidal wave of immigrants, and nobody talks about it. Why is that? Why is that? Rhetorical question, First Lady of Maryland.
I'm not answering that.
Yeah, I didn't think you would.
I'm not going to. Not touching it.
Last item, potpourri.
But seriously, how dangerous is that? No tests, no
some
masks.
do test, some don't.
Oh, okay, good. Well, that's a good system.
The poor border patrol, those poor folks, every day you wonder why they put up with this. You see police retiring. You wonder why those folks don't retire as well. And God bless them. God bless them that want to do that job in the best of circumstances. Now you have the worst of circumstances. And just God bless them. Thanks for doing what you do. And I know you need a couple thousand. Suppose there would be another, the Biden administration announced the end of last week, there'd be another 400, which will probably cover 10 square miles, but probably need 40,000 new border patrol agents. The last item on potpourri for our show this week is midterm elections. We're starting to get close to November. Once November hits, you're going to be less than a year from the midterms. More stories about the president's poll numbers. The president's poll numbers are generally underwater these days. If they're not, depending on the poll, they're not good. The generic ballot is now switched from D to R. The generic ballot being you don't place the name of a candidate's name
Just
on
their
the
party.
poll question, just their party. Are you voting Republican or Democrat for the House's cycle? That's the generic ballot. So if you don't know what that means, that's what it means. When that turns R or D, it's generally, we've been veterans of that question over many, many years, decades. It's generally a reliable signal as to what's going to happen in the midterms. We know history
Well,
tells
generally,
us that the president's party loses
Right.
seats. Very thin margin in the House. And what you see now is what Republicans do, Democrats do, the minority party always does. When you have a president with bad poll numbers, what do? You tie that marginal Democratic House member to that increasingly unpopular president. In this case, it would be Republicans tying that marginal Democrat in the House to President Biden, given what's happened with regard to defund the police and Afghanistan and rising crime rates and the southern border, and now this 3.5, I can't even say it, 3.5 trillion, nobody even knows what that means, $3.5 trillion bill with lots of taxes to go with it. So many of these moderates have survived last cycle because of dislike for President Trump in their districts, particularly with women. They survived despite their votes against the president. They ran as moderates. They haven't voted as moderates. They survived. But again, they are marginal at best with a president at present tanking in the polls. So we'll see what happens there. We'll have a lot more news, a lot more updates concerning the generic ballot, concerning the overviews of the midterm elections from Washington, D.C. over the course of the next 2, 3, 4 months. But always something interesting to watch now that the Biden administration is 9 months old. We're coming up on a year. Once November hits, you're going to have a lot of attention concerning those midterms. And right now, the Republicans are looking pretty good. But again, things can change. We shall see.
Thanks for listening, and please go to bobehrlich.com for all things Bob Ehrlich, and we'll talk to you next time.
Godspeed. Thanks for listening.